$80 trillion is expected to pass from one generation to the next. Now, this is not something that will be happening, it's already happening. And today we're going to talk about how prepared we are and how much of this money is actually going to end up in the intended recipient's hands. And welcome into the program. This is your game plan for retirement with Northwestern Ohio's resource for a common sense approach to planning for your financial investment and retirement future, answering any and all questions about money. He is Chris McIntire, president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services. So glad you are along for the ride, ladies and gentlemen. And Chris, always glad to see you and have you here as our resource today, talking about this phenomenon of the great wealth transfer. Over the next 20 years, an estimated over $80 trillion is expected to pass from one generation to the next. Now, this is not something that will be happening. It's already happening. And today we're going to talk about how prepared we are and how much of this money is actually going to end up in the intended recipient's hands.
Yeah, Peter, and I'm going to say the quick tip here for the week for the folks that are listening out there is, look, there are a lot of boxes that you need to check off before we leave this earth, and would be in your best interest to check many of those boxes well ahead of time instead of letting your beneficiaries, children, friends, and whatnot clean up the mess, if you will.
This might be one of the greatest planning opportunities that is being overlooked, Chris. I mean, baby boomers have spent the last 40 to 50 years working, saving, investing, buying homes, building businesses, and yet we expect that most of them are not as optimized as they could be in transferring this wealth to their family, their loved ones, their charities, their organizations. Their intended beneficiaries might not receive an optimal inheritance and transfer of wealth. So, one of the largest transfers in history, because this generation has done so well in accumulating assets, but the opportunity could be missed. And so we'll talk about that today. Again, Chris, this is not a phenomenon that is in some distant future. This phenomenon of the great wealth transfer is already happening and already underway.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, I'm kind of, as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, how many death claims are we processing at any one given time, given, our time in the industry and the age of our clientele? And, some of them go very quick and easy because, the children were involved and the parents knew, that had talked to their kids ahead of time. And then we have other ones where I don't want my kids to know anything, or my daughter or son-in-law, I don't want them to get involved whatsoever, so they don't say anything. So, we see both ends of the story here, and hopefully we can encourage people to, get these things taken care of, even if you're not telling anybody, to make sure you've checked all those boxes and somebody knows where to find all of that information, all your bank accounts, your credit cards, your emails, all the things you need to close out when, when we go to heaven.
If you have not prepared, Chris, this can cause some complications, some confusion, even some conflict among your family members after your passing, certainly. And I know that that's why you really emphasize preparedness. How many families are having these conversations? Is that sort of keep it close to the vest and not discuss financial matters still a prevalent kind of approach, or is that kind of a relic of the past?
It kind of depends on the relationship with the children. I'll say that if the kids are the children are financially stable, they typically are going to know more of mom and dad's picture, and everybody's got one in the family, and said, yeah, if he knew how much money we'd have, he'd be wanting to borrow more of it. And we'll blame guys on this one. We're not going to throw any ladies under the bus. But we're working. We've got several clients right now that they are taking care of their parents' estates right now. So it doesn't always mean when you passed away. And people who want to do some pre-planning versus before going into a nursing home, they may move their house into an irrevocable trust. They may move money into an irrevocable trust. when it's appropriate. It's hard to move an IRA into an irrevocable trust because that would be a taxable event. You're changing the ownership. But if you have non-IRA assets, or if mom and dad sell their house and go into assisted living, you can take the proceeds from that house and put that into an irrevocable trust. And, here in the state of Ohio, you have to do that 5 years ahead of time in case they went back into the nursing home and you wanted to go on to Medicaid. They will look back 5 years on gifts that you have made.
Well, some specific examples there, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get into more of those, but of course, your setup, your planning, your preparation has to be specific to you and your situation for your family and the benefit of those that you care about or that care about you. And so that's why Chris McIntire does offer to help you structure that plan, to put together your game plan for retirement, or to answer any questions that are pertinent and specific and important to you. If you've got those questions or would like to get your game plan for retirement put together, including a look at your current situation, your projections for your lasting financial confidence, and of course, the legacy that you could potentially leave behind and how to optimize all of those. Pick up the phone and give Chris McIntire and McIntire Retirement Services a call, 419 332 0532, 419 332 0532, 419 332 0532, or at McIntyreRetirementServices.com, McIntyreRetirementServices.com. Now, not everybody has a great deal of wealth and opulence, Chris. Not everybody has a huge amount. But everybody will participate in this. I know not everyone is planning on leaving an inheritance or feels that that is vitally important. Not everybody planning on receiving an inheritance. But what we're talking about is not only a transfer of value and assets, but also a transfer of values. And so regardless of the status or the amount of your savings or lump sum, it's still important to get your plans put together and have your documents in order and updated, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I, we just updated our trust documents, which includes how we want to have assets distributed when we pass away. And, Peter will use Warren Buffett, right? He's transferring all of his wealth, all of his Berkshire Hathaway stock, and giving it out to his kids. And this year, Bill Gates's foundation had been one of the biggest recipients, and Mr. Buffett decided not to give them any money this year because of ties, alleged ties, maybe to Jeffrey Epstein. So things will change over time, and that's very normal. Your children may. Sometimes they predecease you, so you need to update some documents, or they may have health considerations, and you may have children with special needs. So there, you'll hear the term special needs trust. So we're not attorneys, but we certainly make a lot of recommendations for people on look. We handle the money. We've got the beneficiaries updated and everything. But if you want to, have more control from the grave or from heaven, then, you need to do some additional planning here, maybe through a trust, if you will.
Just like our financial plan, Chris, that has to reflect the conditions of the world around us and our changing conditions, our legacy plan is never set it and forget it. It is an ongoing process because things will, might, can, do change on us over time.
Yeah, they absolutely do. The stock market can be very rewarding. That's why we're transferring so much of this wealth right now. The market's had a very good run. Let's just say basically since the 2000 and after the 2008 financial crash. So, people are sitting with millions of dollars, and like you said, I think trillions are getting ready to transfer, and some of that money is IRA dollars, so those have taxable consequences to them. If you own stock outside of your IRA right now, your children will inherit that at the step up in basis. So maybe gifting is not what you want to do. You want to wait until you pass away. That way they get the step up in the cost basis, which means they could sell the stock and not pay any capital gains tax on it.
Well, I think, Chris, many parents spend time, effort, decades teaching their children how to earn money, but far fewer teach them how to manage their money and affairs. Wisdom often outlasts wealth as a result, I think. And preparedness to heirs is more than assets. I think that the motivation that a lot of people start in this process, Chris, is to control the tax implications on whatever money is going to be left behind. And we will get to the tax implications of this. But, Chris, perhaps the biggest problem is not taxes, it is lack of planning and preparedness.
Yes, absolutely. And, I'll give you an example. Somebody has a CD at a bank worth $500,000 and it's in mom's name only. Mom passes away all of a sudden, right? Now, you most likely mom did not name a beneficiary on that CD or her checking account or savings accounts. Titles, very often do not have beneficiaries listed on them. So those are some things that are very easy to take care of on your own. Go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and have your car title have a beneficiary on it. My wife and I just did that this spring. We had to get a new title issued and everything. But hey, what cars cost nowadays? Why do you want to go to probate, which can be 2 to 3% of whatever you're probating? So, a couple $100,000 worth of vehicles and bank instruments, you might be paying $4, $5, $6,000 in unneeded costs. So those are a couple of examples, Peter.
And Chris, you've already given a couple specific examples, situational type things that I think people are missing in the advice they're receiving, the conversations they're having, the information that they are privy to or hearing about. These are the types of specific tips and situations that you do discuss with your clients as you are helping them structure their game plan for retirement. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why it's important to have an experienced, qualified professional working side by side, hand in hand with you who understands your situation. If you're just calling up to a call center where you are getting a random person on an 800 number who identifies you as an account number and doesn't know the specifics of your life and your situation, doesn't know you on a first name basis, perhaps you are missing some of these important conversations and certainly some opportunities that you could do more effective planning. And that's why Chris McIntire is here and serves as a resource for so many proactive savers and investors across and throughout Northwestern Ohio. If you would like to get your game plan for retirement structured, put together in writing, and work side by side with somebody who knows you, a relationship with a proactive planning professional, pick up the phone, start that conversation today. There's no cost, there's no obligation, but it is an opportunity for you to get your game plan for retirement put together by calling 419 332 0532. 419 332 0532. The first couple conversations are always at no cost. It is a complimentary courtesy service to get your game plan for retirement put together with Chris McIntire. 419 332 0532. 419 332 0532. All right, Chris. So the lack of planning, perhaps the biggest problem, but again, the motivation for initiating this process often starts with a couple different places. Now, we talked about the fact that an estimated $80 trillion is expected to change generational hands. However, not all of that money is going to end up with the intended or desired recipients. A large portion of that, perhaps up to a third or more, could go to taxes or could end up in healthcare costs and long-term care institutions. So the inheritance that we envision and imagine, part of it going to the IRS, part of it going to taxes, part of it going for healthcare expenses, and much less because of those factors going to our intended recipients. I mean, these things matter in preparation. So talk to us about how taxes play in. You've already given, again, a couple examples with IRAs and non-qualified assets, but without proper planning, what are some of the implications from a tax standpoint that you are seeing people unfortunately and unnecessarily experience?
Yeah, so when somebody passes away that has an IRA or a 401k account, they're going to look at the beneficiary document and who gets that money. Okay. Typically, if a husband, if we got a mom and a dad that are alive, dad passes away, mom inherits inherits the money, puts her name on it, no problem. When it goes to the non-spouse beneficiaries, kids, grandkids, friends, next door neighbors, brothers, sisters, that money's got to be distributed within a 10-year time frame. So some people, have no idea what the rules and regulations are, and they may say, "Hey, it's only $100,000. Just pay it out to me, and I'll pay the tax on it, and off we go." Well, you're adding $100,000 to your other income as well that you may have. So, there it could bump you into a different tax bracket, could drive up Medicare costs, things like that, depending on how old the beneficiary is, and it may jeopardize your ability to save those assets from the nursing home or something, for example. Okay. And now I'll switch over to the nursing home side with a mom in a nursing home, a father-in-law who had been in a nursing home. They take all the income, right? If you don't have the assets to pay for it. So my mom gets pension and Social Security, and they take all but $75 of that. So, about $2,900 a month that was going into the household no longer goes into it. So that cost can be incredible. And then if you're private paying into the nursing home, let's just use $10,000 a month as an example, and if you haven't done any planning ahead of time, well, you can burn through $120,000, in 1 year. And if you stay for 3 or 4 years, like some people do, of course, I mean, you really can go through a lot of money. And, that's the one area that Peter, the retirees today typically leave up to a hope and a prayer is the health care, long-term care costs.
And again, this is not only going to affect our wealth and assets, obviously, and our quality of life and financial confidence, certainly. But what about that surviving spouse? What about the inheritance and the legacy that we intended to leave over? Those costs, the unplanned, unprepared for, unmitigated cost of healthcare, and then the foreseeable cost of taxes, Chris, are a big implication. And I know that you have advocated often on this program for the benefits, the values of Roth IRAs. And I think that this is catching on, and many more people are now making those Roth contributions, which is great. We know those benefits are that we pay the tax up front. That's not necessarily a benefit, but from there, it's benefits, right? We get the tax deferred growth, we get the tax-free withdrawals if we meet all of the rules and requirements, tax-free inheritance. I know that there are some ancillary benefits there, though, as well, when we're talking about things like survivorship income or Medicare, medical costs. If we're having to pull that money out of a tax deferred account, it actually ends up costing even more than it had to with some proper planning.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so you talked about Roth contributions, and remember, we also have Roth conversion. So there's two C words that we deal with Roth contributions if you're still working, and conversions if you want to take money out of an existing IRA and convert it into a Roth because you're in a low income tax bracket. Very good planning piece there, Peter. And then like when we talk about the survivorship of when one spouse passes away, and then the remaining spouse is alive and living in the house. Okay, well, if that spouse goes into the nursing home, the house now could become a resource that would have to get sold. So that's an area where, you need to really ramp up the estate planning when somebody becomes widowed and wants to stay in the house that they always lived in. Maybe you move that into the irrevocable trust through a good qualified attorney, clear the 5-year window, and then if you go into the nursing home, you're not forced to sell that house. So that's one ramification there. And none of these things are perfect, right? I mean, if you move money into an irrevocable trust, you're paying trust tax rates, which are some of the highest that can be there in the land. So you have to be careful what you actually invest in inside some of these trusts. So again, everything's got pluses and minuses here. We're not saying to anybody, go out and do this. This is the only way to do it. Speak with your investment professional, your tax CPA, qualified attorney. We quarterback a lot of that for our clients, to tell them what they need to do. And that's what people need. They need a coach, and we I think that's probably a niche we have to help people solve all these sorts of problems that they have.
The reality, however, Chris, is that most people don't know about all of these circumstances and implications and requirements until they go through it firsthand. And results would certainly be better if we had planned and prepared for some of these things years in advance. I think that, again, is the benefit of working with someone like yourself, an experienced, qualified professional. You're helping people position for things that could happen 5, 10, 15 years in the future that many people don't know about until we're walking through that door. We can be better prepared and have more optimal results if we are aware of these things and positioning our assets and affairs well ahead of time rather than as we are experiencing them.
Yes, yeah, without a doubt, Peter. And if you look at somebody's entire estate and if they've had some financial success, they might have money in 10 different places, life insurance, investments, bank accounts. And, I know when we're trying to help my parents out, at one point they had 6 checking accounts. We had to, as my mom went into a nursing home, we had to remove her name from the trust. So, sometimes you have to undo things that you did in, the unintended consequences, because situations change. And the higher net worth that you have, especially if you have your parents that might live in a different state, like, say some of the higher tax states like a New Jersey or a Massachusetts, or a California, and you're dealing with laws out there, but you're based in Ohio. So, you might be working with an out-of-state attorney and hoping you're getting the best advice. So, a lot of this it's a lot of work. It can be very stressful. And the more you do ahead of time versus crisis planning, it's just so much easier on everybody. And, it takes time to clean up all these things. I mean, and we're constantly monitoring and keeping up. If you've got jewelry and, who do you want that jewelry to go to? Things that don't necessarily have titles, or, a gun collection or a coin collection, who's supposed to get those things? You need to document that, because believe me, if you throw $500,000 on the dining room table, somebody or somebody's spouse is going to argue about it.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you've talked about some more of advanced strategies, and obviously the more assets that we have, the more complex our situation is. If we have properties, if we have businesses, things like that, then the more complex and the bigger the need will be for planning. But let's be real, like even the basics have not been addressed and must be addressed for almost everybody. Having proper documents in place and updating and double checking our beneficiary designations are the start of the estate planning conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And bank accounts, are they payable on death? Are your car titles transfer on death? Do you have a beneficiary deed on your home, for example? My wife and I, we both own our trust actually owns our house, but we have our own bank accounts, together. And then, but if something happens to both of us in the same car accident, for example, where will that money go? So that we call that transfer on death or payable on death or beneficiaries, depending on the type of account. Transfer on death, payable on death, and beneficiary designations are accomplishing the same thing, basically avoiding probate. You go into the bank with a death certificate, your proof of identification and whatnot, and then you walk out with the check. Okay, versus, going to the court, going through probate, and then taking all that information, going back to the bank, and paying the attorney, lots of money to help you through that process, where you could, making a beneficiary on a bank account. You don't need to pay an attorney to do that unless you're using a trust, obviously.
We've talked an awful lot, again, Chris, about communication being so important. In today's digital world, where we've got digital assets, things that are not there in front of us, tangible and touchable. And in a world where oftentimes we're not even getting mail notifications any longer of the existence or updates on those assets, where we have digital statements that we've got to know where they're at and download. I want to emphasize again the importance of documentation and communication about these things, because that can lead to a nightmare for families not knowing where things are or not knowing how to access them.
Yeah, and and I hate to tell all these personal stories. I feel like I could make a movie about this or a reality TV show. But we had a friend of ours who passed away suddenly, and unbeknownst to Robin and I, we were the power of attorney and trustee that they had named for us for his spouse who had a cognitive disorder, and we had no idea. It's like, okay, now we've got to figure out where do they do everything? And we knew a little bit, but not a whole lot. So, if you've got a power of attorney appointed or somebody who's going to be your kids are going to be your trustees, they dang sure better know where to find things.
So don't just leave assets, leave confidence. Don't just leave an inheritance, leave planning and instructions, and help your family beneficiaries make the most of it by having those discussions, being open about them. You don't have to necessarily disclose exact dollar amounts, but Chris, the open conversations is and are on a continuing basis going to improve the outcome of this great wealth transfer phenomenon that we are already a part of and seeing.
Yes, without a doubt, you're removing a lot of stress in a very stressful time.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to have a relationship with an advisor who knows you, your situation, if you feel like you don't have that right now, your source of guidance or access to your asset information and updates is a call center with a headset and identifying you by an account number. You could be missing many of these vitally important conversations and aspects in planning. So it's not just about access to the market any longer. You have to have the full picture. Income, investments, taxes, healthcare, legacy planning are all interconnected pieces of the picture. And that's what your game plan for retirement is all about. If you'd like to get that put together, have conversations, have specific questions about how to have your money work harder to help you achieve your goals, pick up the phone and start that conversation with Chris McIntire and the team from McIntire Retirement Services. 419-332-0532, 419-332-0532. Chris, it is always a pleasure to have you here on the program, and we appreciate the value and the opportunity that you provide to listeners and proactive planners across Northwestern Ohio to get their plan put together or double checked and updated. Make sure no stone is unturned, no hole is unknown, that you have identified those and helped them strategize on how to address them.
That's right. Let's plug those holes so you don't have to bail out the boat. A lake reference, of course.
Well, Chris, we always appreciate your time. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it is a complimentary courtesy service, never any cost or obligation to get your questions answered and addressed and to get your game plan for retirement put together. Give a call, 419-332-0532, 419-332-0532. Chris, always a pleasure. Thank you for being here as our resource on your game plan for retirement.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody. God bless America. Be safe.
Tune into Chris McIntire's full radio program and visit McIntireRetirementServices.com for many additional valuable resources, including other great episodes of Game Plan for Retirement with Chris McIntire. Be sure to subscribe.
The content of this radio show is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. You are encouraged to seek investment, tax, or legal advice from an independent professional advisor. Any investments and/or investment strategies mentioned involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. Advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, a registered investment advisor.
Fiduciary duty extends solely to investment advisory advice and does not extend to other activities such as insurance or broker-dealer services. Advisory clients are charged a quarterly fee for assets under management, while insurance products pay a commission, which may result in a conflict of interest regarding compensation.
Investment in notes involves risks not associated with investment in ordinary debt securities. The securities are not bank deposits and are not insured by the FDIC or any other government agency, nor are they obligations of or guaranteed by a bank. The securities will not be listed on any securities exchange, and there may be little or no secondary market for these securities, and secondary trading may be limited. Accordingly, you should be willing to hold your note security to maturity. These securities are subject to the credit risk of the issuing bank, and any actual or anticipated changes to its credit ratings or credit spreads may adversely affect the market value of the security.